Aloha and welcome to this screencast providing a brief introduction to coding standards. And what I'm hoping you'll get out of this is an understanding of why the heck we would care about having standardized mechanisms for coding, how we'd actually go about doing that, and then finally a little bit about what kinds of tool support exists, at least for the technology stack that we're using in this class. So standards are a great thing. They help a large code base that's been developed by multiple people look as if it was developed by one person. And that common look and feel has a huge impact upon the readability of the system. So beyond that kind of superficial conformity, there are other standards that we're going to implement that actually help avoid common types of errors in the code, and other types of standards that will help us make sure that when people are trying to understand a code base that we've written, there is the kind of documentation available that will help them get there. And all of this relates back to our 3 prime directives that I talked about in the open source module that enable us to increase the success that our projects will actually be successful, right? Increase the odds that our projects will be successful. So in this module, right now what I want to deal with is, talk about is 2 kinds of standards, one relating to coding, and these standards are specific to the JavaScript language, and another set of standards related to the more overall project, and this has a lot to do with our hosting mechanism, which in this case is GitHub. So for coding, we're going to think about the layout of the code, which is pretty trivial, but then also things about how you name variables and how you do commenting and avoid various problems in your coding. We will at some point have a standard for module definition, but I've elected at this point in the class not to do it because modules in JavaScript are under a lot of flux right now, but it's going to all be solved soon. And then finally, we're going to have automated quality assurance for certain types of coding problems through a package called JSHint. And then on the project side, the whole idea is how do we structure our repository to ensure that people can understand what we're doing and navigate it as quickly and as easily as possible. So just a couple screenshots of, IntelliJ, as with most IDEs, has nice support for automated correction of layout problems. So one of the things you'll be doing is going into IntelliJ, into the Preferences menu, and then doing minor tweaking of their default code layout preferences panes, at which point you can just type Option-Command-L, at least on a Macintosh, and the code will be formatted completely correctly. So that's an easy one. JSHint, there's also support within JavaScript for a package which looks for common types of problems with JavaScript code, and we have a standard JSHint resource file that you can use to kind of enable the kinds of checks that we want to have in this class. And then finally, IntelliJ has support for JSDoc, which is the documentation standard we want to, or templating, kind of layout, documentation layout standard. And that's just a matter of hitting the /** and return, and you'll get a template for the JSDoc for a function done automatically. Okay, so that's the kind of the overview of coding standards. What I want to do now is look at a little bit about what we've actually set up for this class so you understand it. With respect to code layout, you have to go through these sets of screens in the Preferences menu, starting with Preferences, Editor, Code Style, to set up a default for tab sizes and indents. We're not going to use the tab character ever, if possible, in this class. And so you can scroll through this and see spaces, wrapping and braces, blank lines, soft wraps, etc. All that stuff you can do just minor configuration, and then you're all set to go. Naming conventions, we're going to use camel case, not the inchworm style of variable definition. and we'll avoid JavaScript keywords. We'll capitalize functions when they're constructors. For comments, we're going to use the JS doc convention style, which looks like this, where you'll have @param tags for the parameters, and you'll indicate return values when necessary. And in the case that you have a variable number of arguments, you want to put that in there. That's not necessarily going to happen that often, but if it does. And then we're always going to include curly braces around blocks, even if there's a single line. We're always going to use semicolons to prevent this automatic semicolon insertion feature. We'll use triple equals, not double equals, to avoid certain kinds of problems. Then if there's a lot of parameters to a function, you may want to choose to have an options value for that. That's kind of a common idiom in JavaScript. Always return a value from every different branch of your code. And then module definition, this has been something I've kind of debated a lot about what to do, because there's one convention called CommonJS, or almost a de facto standard on the server side. On the browser side, there's a de facto standard called Require.js. There's systems that try to kind of unify these two things, like Browserify. But the most important thing is that in the next version of JavaScript, there's going to be a whole new modularity system, which is actually, I think, kind of better than any of the above. And so as a result of that, I've decided to just kind of try to hold off on talking about module definition until this gets a little more popular, and then we'll move to that. Finally, there is some automated support for certain kinds of quality assurance called JS Hint, and we can click here and take a look at it. And so we can look for undefined variables and variables that are referenced but never defined, and lots of other kinds of issues. And you can see in this module's, where is it here? Okay, so here's all the different tests that JS Hint supports and the values that we're going to have, so you can kind of read through this and see what we're selecting to check for with our JS Hint. So that's the JavaScript coding standards. I want to mention one. There's, if you get to the bottom of here, or when you enable JS Hint for your systems, you'll notice that you'll get these red lines along the side, and then it'll put a little twiddly red underline underneath the first character of the violating function or variable, and you can mouse over to see what the heck the problem is and hopefully fix it. Then I mentioned the use of the globals and exported special comments, which help you deal with functions and variables that you defined elsewhere than the current file, and also variables and functions you don't actually invoke in the current file because you're expecting them to be invoked by a client. So those will generally be marked as an error by JS Hint, and so to remove that warning or error, you define one of these two comments. So that's the JavaScript coding standards, the coding standards. On the other side, they're the project standards, and so that involves setting up GitHub correctly, and then providing a README file which provides helpful information about the system. For small projects, this is generally enough information. For larger projects, of course, a single README file isn't going to be enough for everything, and so you can use the wiki page facility within GitHub to provide many pages of documentation, or you can even go to Jekyll and create a big monster site if you want. All projects should have a license file. We talked about that in the open source software module, so you can pick any open source license or the open source license that you prefer for your projects. And then it's important to exclude certain files. I find that sharing the IntelliJ project files leads to unending pain, and so my recommendation for this class is that when you're working on a team with other people, you can all just define your own IntelliJ project files. Don't share them. It's a little extra overhead, but we're all going to obey these coding standards anyway, so it shouldn't be too bad. Of course, the top level of your GitHub repository should not be a single directory, and very importantly, I would like to see you guys learn how to use GitHub Pages to create an attractive top-level homepage for your projects. Very easy to do, and it makes it much easier for users to kind of understand how to use your system. And then there's some recommendations about how to write commit messages. It's worth kind of skimming through this this posting to understand one person's somewhat opinionated view on what a good commit message should be like. So that's the basic idea of coding standards and some examples of how we're going to use them in this class. I look forward to seeing your beautifully written code.